Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This particular session has been one that's been received and wanted in many places. Is it anyone going through some changes right now? Anyone feeling that? Yeah, we kind of are in a state where we're having a lot of things going on. So that's what we're going to explore today. And it's not all going to come from me. We want to hear some of the experiences that you all are having, and so find others that are experiencing some of the same things. We'll be spending time in breakout rooms and getting some ideas from one another and how to really navigate what we're going through right now, and just appreciation that I'm not in this alone. But I like to start with this analogy. Um, because I am the analogy girl. Anyone that knows me, anyone that's spent any time with me, you know that I've given you some sort of analogy to tie it to. But I really think what we're going through right now seems to be a lot like cleaning the closet. How many of you like to clean your closet? Let's see a few show of hands. Use your emojis there or whatever you want. Anyone out there that, now let's just say, who hates to clean your closet and needs to probably do that? Is that on one of your to-do lists? Let's see a show of hands. I should put up two or three because I got three closets right now that kind of really need my attention. So when you go through and think about cleaning your closet, what do they tell you to do? They tell you to go in and throw it all on your bed, right? Clean everything out. Well, I kind of feel like that's kind of what's happened in our world, is like they threw everything on the bed and we've got this mess, and there's some things hidden in the corner that we kind of forgot about, and there's just unorganized. But what we know is that you need to kind of start sorting it through, and there's some things that need to go in the toss pile, right? There's some things that really, if we were truly to be honest, we're not going to get in those genes again, and they just needed to go away. Same kind of thing with the programming that there's some things that needed to probably be put into the another day's place, but there's also things that maybe needed to be moved somewhere else. They were a better fit somewhere else. So we're finding ourselves that sorting that's going on in the world, but that's hard. That's so hard to go through and manage and understand what's really going on. Chances are things are going to get put in your closet again. They're going to be more organized. We're still going to need clothes, right? We're still going to need the programs that we have. So no matter what you think about, remember that we are doing good work that is still going to be needed. So we're gonna clean off that bed, we're gonna get it organized, and we're gonna move forward with neat, orderly piles that make more sense, hopefully. And so we just gotta kind of navigate this change. What we know about change is that 70% of change initiatives fail. That's according to John Kotter, who is a guru in this. That's crazy, isn't it? To think that 70% of all change efforts fail. Well, we're going to look ahead of why that is. And there's really one thing: it's human resistance. When you think about how anything, think about a child, you're trying to change their routine. It's going to be the human element that is there. They're not knowing what's going to happen, so they're unfamiliar with it. That's part of that resistance. There's that fear of what's going to be like. I don't know if I want to do this, right? And we've been there too, right? Haven't you been there where it feels like, oh, I just don't know. I'm hesitant here. And the challenge of adapting those new experiences. How am I going to fit in my life? What's going to be there? And if we're going to be really honest, this happens a lot for all of us. And so to get to know some of the folks that are with you, to hear who is going through these changes, we're going to have you go ahead and spend a couple minutes. Megan's going to be putting you into breakout rooms just to share about where have you experienced this discomfort of leaving the familiar. What are you fearing of the unknown that's here? What are some of those challenges that are, in adapting to those new experiences? So we're going to take a moment and just kind of, how does this resistance show up in your work? And if even you can give yourself a thinking of an example with your family, that's fine too. But this is your moment to get to know who's here, kind of find a person to be a wingman in the navigating the change. You may not work in the same state even, but that's okay, because it doesn't matter what state we're working in right now. Every state is feeling like they have some change that they're going through. Once we get done with that, I'm going to give you a formula to work with to kind of help navigate some of this resistance that y'all are talking about in your breakout room. So Megan, are you ready to give us some breakout rooms and let people get to know each other?
I am.
So, quite simply, you're going to be thinking about these questions that are on the screen or the statements that I have on the screen there, and just really talking about where resistance show up for you in work and what's going on for you. So, get to know each other in the breakout room, and when we come back, we'll have a little discussion. So, I'd love to see in the chat where you're all coming from. Let's just take a moment and have you populate in the chat just the state that you're coming from. Yeah. So we get an idea of the variety of folks that are here. We're representing across the United States, it's looking like. So as we're populating that list, go ahead and scroll through there and just kind of see where we're all coming from. In your small groups, what did you find that was very similar? And remember, we're from so many different states. What similarities were you noticing? A couple brave souls to come off mic for me.
A couple of people, there was four of us in our group, and actually three out of the four were in newer positions. So they had made a change of careers or a change in positions.
So that, yeah, we were just talking about that in our breakout room, right, Kenan? About how actually navigating the change as a new person might be easier because you don't have the old language and the old stuff hanging on. So good to know that you got some folks that are coming in at the same point as you as being new. A couple other similarities. What else did you find?
In our group right now, the stress of federal funding and not
Hmm.
knowing what will or will not happen with it and if grants will be renewed or even awarded.
Right. It's that waiting, the unknown, what's around the corner. I always told everyone that so I ran grants for 20 plus years. Those that know me, that's you people are like, well, what are you going to do? And I'm like, well, I'm not going to go look for work. I just looked for another grant. And I'm not sure if that is going to exist in this time that we're in this. So how can you diversify? What are some of the different ways that you might be able to diversify some of the questions you have to look at? In your small groups, what did you where did you feel a little validated in what you've been thinking as it relates to resistance or anything that you were all talking about? Where'd you like, oh, this feels good to hear this from somebody else too?
I think we found like obviously the change in the staffing and what's going on in the world, we've been in communities that people don't want to change. They need that comfort of what they've been doing and are more resistant to any kind of change right now.
Mm-hmm. And think about the folks that you're working with. How do these things that these three elements kind of show up for them? You kind of talked about, what's around the corner, the fear of not knowing. What else is showing up, do you think, with the folks that are you were working with, whether it be your staff or even the coalition members around the table? Where do you see some of those things showing up? All right, we got a quiet group this morning. Anyone that knows me, we are interactive, so feel free to pop in anytime. But what are some of the ideas that you maybe came through to kind of embrace this uncertainty that we're having? What were some of the things that maybe someone said that just resonated for you? Like, yeah, that instead of just being in like, yeah, we got a lot of resistance. Did anyone offer, who offered some, but this is something we're doing? Anyone offer anything that you want to share with the rest of the group?
Uh, One thing that I offer, it's about challenges and adapting to new experiences or the
Mm-hmm.
fear of the unknown specifically. I just try to remind my team, think about the individuals that we serve on a day
Yeah.
to day, especially when you talk about crisis, dispatch, or things of that sort that has to deal with the fear of the unknown or just the challenges that they face when it deals with substance use disorder and thing. And so if we can adapt ourselves, but we expect them to, it's kind of like just a reminder, like, oh, okay, so keep ourselves grounded. So,
That's a great segue for me, Kenan. So thank you for that. Because what we know is that the human resistance comes from this this formula. And if we cannot tell people what that looks like, what our work looks like, so that vision, they're not going to notice it. Or if they feel like it's not really a problem and they're not dissatisfied with anything, it just isn't a problem, they're going to not have any want for change. And sometimes they just feel overwhelmed. It's like, wow, that's a big problem. I don't know what to do. So we're going to dive into this formula a little bit more. But before we do that, what do we know about math? I have a math school teacher gearing up to go back to high school teaching math. And so we're kind of math geeks around here. If any one of these elements on the left-hand side is this equation, you get the prize for the day, which is a Yahoo. Put it in the chat. What is, if any one of those three things are zero, what happens to the right-hand side of an equation? It is zero. So if we don't have the dissatisfaction in our world that they're occupying in, if we don't have the vision clearly outlined, if we don't have the first steps, we're never ever going to overcome that resistance to the change. So we're going to explore that a little bit closer, but realize it's just those three elements. And the more that you can increase those, the greater that force against the resistance will be. So if I can click, we'll go to the next slide and look at the dissatisfaction. So when we were talking about dissatisfaction in general, there we're really talking about the status quo. How many of you have ever heard, show of hands or say yes in the chat, how many have heard this saying, it's always been that way in our community? All right. Oh yeah, 100%. So people are kind of in that state of denial. They're perfectly okay with the status quo. So when we bring the human element, bring the data, we need to increase the awareness because people really don't know. So they knew that 1 in 5 kids were suffering with ACEs, and what does that really mean? And paint a story about, Billy who goes home and doesn't have any food and is expected to take care of his 3 other kids. When you paint that story, how can they be okay with that? So if we can bring that human element and really bring to life the problems that we're really addressing, how can you really wipe out the line item for that money? So we want to create that awareness. You need to make sure people understand that. You have proof with the data. So when we start our work, that's why we start with assessment. Where is this problem? What does it look like? Bring it to life. Because then how can you be okay with it? So get that dissatisfaction by really bringing awareness. And that's where we start in that process, right? Then we move into that vision. That's great, but wow. What are we supposed to do with that? How are we going to help Billy in changing his home life? What is possible? So we need to create a vision of what's possible. We need to create that compelling thing that we can step into and believe that there could be change. We believe that there's some place in our community where substance misuse is minimized to a point where individuals have all the support they need. There's hospital beds for those that need to have access to them. We need to show how we have people that care, that there's stakeholders around the table or the community interest groups that are wanting to do something. So you create this vision that this is possible. But boy, that seems like a lot, right? I love to think that we could get there, but how are we supposed to get there? So it's creating those plans that take the first steps. And sometimes those first steps are baby steps, right? They don't have to be big steps. They can just be baby steps. It might just be doing a awareness campaign with the different service clubs in the community to help shake up that status quo. It might be, getting into the schools and doing programming early on so we can do upstream prevention. So we identify some things that we really could do to create that momentum that then really can encourage the dialogue and celebrate those differences that we have and all the different perspectives about how we can address the change that we want to see in the world. So it's by bringing those 3 elements in that you really can start the process towards overcoming change. And I like to say, we didn't get here overnight, right? This is a slow process. we created a problem eons ago. We were just talking about the pre-SAPS course, and it talks about the history journey of drugs and alcohol and everything else. And this problem that we are trying to overcome is decades long. So it takes all of us, and it takes all of us on a page that they can move forward. All right. So the last question on your scenario sheet there was, what's an insight or lesson from your group that you might be able to share in the main room about applying the change formula? What was something that came from your discussion? Let's share some things. Anyone in room one want to share something from your takeaways?
Sure, I can jump in on that one. Yeah, so we majority of our group members actually are in a rural or semi-rural community, so there was some relevant relevant discussion about what they're actually dealing with, kind of similar to this scenario. We looked at vision being kind of the primary issue here. It sounds like there is a coalition that exists, people participate in it, but and they seem more or less satisfied to the point where they've almost stagnated in their progress. So kind of a return to basics of doing like a community reassessment to kind of see the readiness to change, maybe that they've fallen further back down on the scale, and then utilization of the results of that assessment to kind of push the agenda forwards, maybe by finding relevant examples of neighboring communities or similar demographic communities that have had success with programs.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, it seemed pretty straightforward. At least we had a scenario where there already was a coalition and the community seemed on board with it. So it's not like there was a ton of having to like increase that buy-in off the bat.
So it was really making sure people knew why this was important to work with and going back to the assessment that was important to do. Yep. Awesome. Well, I'm seeing Miss Maggie there underneath you on my screen, and that was scenario 7. So someone from scenario 7 want to talk about theirs?
As far as what we were going to share with the group, I think one of the things we kind of talked about was that for this scenario, they were also struggling with the vision, as far because everybody had different ideas about what success means, and so we talked about the importance of kind of doing some strategic planning as far as how the grant money that people get will lead to what the pie in the sky idea would kind of look like. And so giving people an opportunity to take literally like little sticky notes and vote on what idea is best. And we talked about the key being to have everybody get multiple votes. That way everyone doesn't just vote for their own, right?
Right.
And then being able to, of course, explain, why I think my idea is best. And that way it's not just people going in blindly and saying this sounds good or this sounds good. And so then you see it, and that's what everyone has agreed on. And it's, they're in black and white with the numbers of what gets voted on. So
It's so important to have their voice right in there so they feel
exactly.
like they're part of that development of the vision. So awesome.
Mhm.
Let's jump over to number 8. Do we have someone from 8 that would be able to talk to us about your scenario?
Hi. Yeah, so our scenario was a coalition was voted to address binge drinking among young adults, but then no actions were taken within 6 months. There's no timeline, and everyone else kind of waiting for someone else to lead the project. So we talked about how the dissatisfaction was there, but there's no vision and there's no first steps. So one of the things we talked about doing was maybe at the next meeting saying everybody write down like the top 3 things or the top 5 things for them that they would want to see, or even just 1 or 2, and then review that with everyone, pick out the maybe top 3 or top 5 things in common from everybody and start there. So that would be starting with the vision. And then once the vision was kind of more cohesive and it came through from the community based, people are, this is what we want to see. Then from there, working on the first steps and being able to identify where do we start?
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you, Georgia. So you just described 3 things. One was where we weren't really knowing what the problem was. We decided that we didn't have a vision, and now we are looking at, well, where do we begin? And so the 3 areas of the formula, it's very simple, as one said. But if any one of those things are missing, and sometimes it's just a good way as a coordinator or the director of a program to say, what's missing here? How come we're getting stalled? What one of these elements are not there? And one of the things y'all talked about, so use those scenarios, guys. Those scenarios are a great talking point just to kind of point the blame, I don't know the blame, but point to the issue that actually may be happening for your community and taking it away from our issue. But look, here's some scenarios that may be happening. And then when they identify for themselves what the scenario is, it's like, oh, we're kind of doing this. And so maybe that's a place for us to start. It's always good to take it one away from being personal, right? But also, as we started this discussion, we brought up the community readiness. And so this is the Colorado Tri-Ethnic Community Readiness Survey. How many of you are familiar with that? Let's just put in the chat. This is something that's new to you or you use it. Let us know if you use this in the chat. Basically, it's 9 levels, and it's an assessment where you work with the community members that are key interest groups that should know something about the problem, and you as a group do the interviews, and then you pull it apart and say, where do we think people are? So oftentimes when we do this, and let's see, who's new to you? Okay, check it out. Megan, maybe if you could look up the Colorado Community Readiness and throw that in the chat as far as a resource. I wasn't ready for that, but I think it'd be good for them to check it out. It's out there, great resource. So I'll let those do that in the background. We're going to discuss, though, how do we apply the community readiness to this change model? So already pointed out, if you're at no awareness or denial, you're not going to have that dissatisfaction, right? We will not be able to overcome the resistance to change if we don't have people that are saying it's a problem here. So that doesn't happen here, that comment that we get from our communities. Our work has to start here. There's no program implementation that's going to be well accepted or policy changes if we have no awareness that there's a problem at all. When you try to shake up a community, they're going to put resistance at you if you cannot get them past this level. So the work really is about sharing that community needs assessment that we talked about in the very beginning, bringing life to the problem, making sure that the issue is on the agenda, as an organization, we're out there saying this is what the programming is about and why it's necessary. Then as we moved up the community readiness, we're looking at that vague awareness and the pre-planning, kind of where we got stuck. Georgia, you talked about that in yours, about we're kind of stuck in this and we need to have some first steps. Really moving it into that level. So you're finding people are there. That's probably where they're at on this community readiness. And this is about creating that vision, as Maggie said, and really saying, I have no idea what I can do in the community, whether I feel that's more up to the schools, or maybe that's public health problem, or maybe it's those prevention folks. So when you're passing it off to someone else and don't realize where they fit into the plan, that's when you want to pull them in and help them identify the ways with sticky notes, or bringing your 3 or 5 ideas to the next meeting, seeing that they have a part of the solution that we're looking for. And we need to make that space so that community members really can develop the change they want to see in the community, and they will be involved. And then the last area, and honestly, I don't know about all of you that are familiar with it, I rarely got to see a community that got to this, 5, 6, 7 level that's really hard to get to. But if we do things right, there's where we're really be able to create those first steps. Everyone's on board. They know that we have an issue. We see what we can do about it. And we are able to identify perhaps those things that we actually can do. You might need to pull some other folks in, who someone that knows someone, right? And that's where, people are becoming advocates of the problem because they are owning it. And like I spoke with Maggie, making sure that people are involved in the planning process is where we get that buy-in, and it becomes a community issue. I know we all have been here. Again, let's see in the chat if this is a scenario you can identify with. Have you ever been part of a planning process where when you spent 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, maybe spent 2 days planning, and then the documentation came out and you're like, where did this come from? And you felt like you were not at, you weren't even there. You might have just given up 2, 4, 6, 8 hours of your time, but nothing of the planning that came out or the document that came out was anything that you even recognize. Anyone been there before? Check on my chat over here. Yeah, we all have. So it's our job as conveners of the community to try and find a place where we can let people be part of that planning process. There's a lot of great tools, and that's a whole nother series of webinars that we could do. But we got to remember that we need to make sure we have the voice in that community level change, or the change will never happen. So continue to work on that because it's important. You can get to this point if you really have people engaged and the resistance to change has really been achieved. It happens when we have people that are there and able to speak on behalf of the community from their perspective. They feel like they're involved. They feel like they have a chance to do something with it. So community readiness, really important to recognize where to start. It's one thing to have the formula. It's another thing to really meet where the community is at. Because oftentimes we have this happening. Who's got a voice for me that can read this? I'd like to have someone else give me a voice. Someone read this poem to me. This is an old poem. Okay.
His job is it. This is a story about 4 people named everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. There was an important job to be done, and everybody was asked to do it. Everybody was sure somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done.
All right. Thank you, Vicki. How many of you resonate with that little poem? This is from like the 1900s and it's still happening, right? Let's see what you think in the chat. Give me some ideas here. If you've ever had to everybody, anybody, nobody. Right? I know, and when I was raising up my kids, that's definitely what we had going on in our household. But it happens in our communities. Like like you show up to a program and all of a sudden there were no cookies. Well, I thought you were going to order the cookies. What? Well, I was bringing the lemonade, and so it's real easy. So we want to get to the point where this isn't the situation, because we want people to be able to respond and have responsibility. This is from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey. While we can't control outside things, the one thing we can control is how to respond. So you can show up to an event and have to bring the cookies and you didn't. How do you respond to that? Well, you run to the store quick and get something, or otherwise you put the blame and you get angry. We all have a way that we can respond and have responsibility. So if you look at that, let's just we're going to let you think about this a little bit more in a way we've talked about a lot of things today. We've talked about some scenarios. How are you going to be able to take this and talk about resistance in your coalitions or teams? What are some of the things that meeting people where they are helps reduce that resistance? And what have we discovered about providing information or the opportunity to be involved to really help spark that engagement with folks. So one more time, we're going to mix you up, hopefully meet a few different people this time, and just give you, I think, let's just do 5 minutes just to talk through what are some things that are resonating with you, ruminate, think on these questions as you go into that room, and just come back with a couple ideas. So make the rooms a little bit bigger if you would, Megan,
Okay.
so we have a few more voices. And we'll just talk about these things. And then when we come back, we're going to end this with what's one thing that you can do tomorrow to help navigate change. So be thinking on that as you go through your discussions. But how can you respond differently? All right, we are back for the final stretch. So let's hear some voices, and hopefully you've talked enough in your small groups. You feel comfortable enough to come on and share something. But what's something you're picking up about today that you didn't really think about before today? What's something you've noticed where you might have had one of these elements missing in your work? Maybe it's somebody else said. Let's hear a few voices. And feel free to fill our chat up. We can be your voice in the chat too if you don't feel comfortable talking. But what's something you've noticed about, thinking a little differently today than maybe when you started this?
I'll say something. I think for me personally, the thing that really stuck out today is just because for me, like I have dissatisfaction, right? That's why I'm in this work. So like to me, it's a no-brainer, but really getting that out to, your target audience or whoever you are trying to get the message to, because if there isn't dissatisfaction, they're not going to be part of the vision or first steps because they're not seeing an issue. And so I think for me, it just kind of clicked like, I see an issue with what's going on, but if they don't, it's really not going to matter, and I can't do it by myself. So how do I kind of give them that information or like really have them see what I see to get them to be part of the solution and not just like everything's good or it's under control,
Yeah, I can remember being sitting in front of our legislators over the noon hour as a parent, talking to the legislators, educating them on when we were trying to put the medical marijuana at the time, that's what they called it, right? In place. And it's just like they had no clue because there's all these other reasons and all these other voices of why it was good, why it was good. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. And I called it Pandora's box. Before you open up Pandora's box, I want to let you know what you're opening up. We already have a problem with alcohol and access to alcohol. Now you're going to have access to another substance that our kids can really make bad choices with. Think a moment before you open up this box. And that's kind of how I said, let's shake up that status quo. It's not okay. This isn't okay. And when we talk about kids' lives, a lot of things that we're talking about for policy isn't okay. So we need to let them know that it's not okay. Thanks, Sam. Someone else. What's something that this morning you woke up and you thought one way and now you're thinking a different way?
So, Angie, one of the people that was in the room 12 with me mentioned something that I feel, but that I don't share openly. So I think it's important, they mentioned like with all of the funding challenges and uncertainty that just showing up is, and I say showing up is an act of resistance. But I don't communicate that to the people that I'm working with necessarily. Like I don't say, hey, there's value in you continuing the work, and I appreciate you continuing the work, even with uncertainty. Like the work is even more critical now, not knowing what could happen in a year or 5. And so communicating that and continuing to offer that empowering language and just encouragement, I think really goes a long way. And I've not really said that even to my own team members, but certainly not, to partners. So I think just that continuing of keep doing what you're doing a great job, and just, we have to keep together and keep pushing.
Yeah, and just even with, Sam, your passion that you have, and, we all work with great people. I don't think we toot our own horns enough, right? I think I had a conversation maybe just yesterday with one of you about this. We are humble people. We do it because it's the good things to do, but we need to be tooting our horn about what is it that we're making change in, because it's not oftentimes seen, right? And going forward, despite the resistance that we're feeling or despite the unknown that we are facing, yeah, and having your peer support group to be able to, hopefully you all met someone today maybe that you can stay connected with, because that's what helps you keep walking forward when you are being pushed, an uphill battle, so to speak. Thanks, Vicki. One more. Maybe even thinking about how this formula could help start a conversation that moves towards making that change possible. How do you see yourself using this formula?
I guess I'll go. This has been really interesting for me because, of course, I had already seen the 9 stages of community readiness through the Colorado Tri-Ethnic. Just having a different take on that, my current position, some of our team members are in the middle of a community readiness assessment grant to do community readiness over addressing harm related to problem gambling. So this is something that like I will definitely share with my team as kind of just an alternative way to view those 9 steps, and see if maybe that brings some illumination for us or some added benefit to what we're already doing.
Thanks. Yeah, really applying, just because sometimes you can't jump to the first step, so they're not ready for the first steps. They're not going to be able to get there. So building up that each of those elements make it a stronger case for overcoming that resistance. Thanks, Stephanie. Let's hear one more voice. I guess I didn't see the chat. Do we have words in the chat? So saying once you have all the data, what are you going to do with it? You can act responsibly or do nothing. Either way, you're held accountable because you knew. Now you're, once you know, you can't unknow. How's that old saying go? Once you know, I had an uncle that used to always say that. There's a whole phrase out there. It's like the pink elephant, right? Once you see the pink elephant, you can't ever not see it again. So once you know, it's always going to be there. So as we go forward, and I do hope you take the little rack card that was shared in there is something that has something you share with the other folks. Certainly something that Stephanie, you can bring back to your team. I also have, and I think this should work, this QR code goes to a YouTube channel. I do these 90-minute webinars, and I don't know about you, but I wouldn't go back and listen to a 90-minute webinar with breakout rooms and everything else. So I started creating, playing around with AI a little bit, a podcast, 2 voices on Notebook LP that are talking about everything we talked about here. It's 15, 17 minutes, something like that. And yes, once you know better, you do better. Thank you, Allison. That's what I was trying to think of. So this is those 2 talking about the PowerPoint's kind of built into it, some of the things. So it's one way for you to share what we've talked about today. Feel free, have fun with it if you want, share it with other folks. But I do think our PTDC will be putting a survey in the chat. But any last questions for the good of the cause or thoughts that you have about what you've learned today? I like to close, and I encourage you to do this today as well. I came with and I'm leaving with. So some folks that would be willing to share their thoughts about I came today with and I am leaving with. Feel free to put that in the chat or a couple voices.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
One of the things that we talked about in our group was what Kabita talked about. Once you have the data, What are you going to do with it? And since I'm here in Texas, one of the things that brought to mind, and I'm going to try to be sensitive about this, is recently in the flooding that we experienced in Austin, in the Austin area, some of the communities down there were aware of the volume of water and flooding. And one community chose to respond effectively, and they set up the sirens, and they were aware there was money available. And other communities were, I guess you could say, chose to not respond, or their leaders
Mm-hmm.
chose to put it in the back burner. And so obviously some lives were lost. And
Mm-hmm.
so we are held accountable. Our leadership is held accountable. So you can't say you were not informed. You did not know. You knew. And some people chose to act and some people chose not to act. So, and we have to act and respond accordingly. And then hopefully in the future, we will choose better and know better and do better for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. And hearts go out to everyone there. That was tragic. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if anyone's at NPN next week, I add an element of accountability to this presentation as well. And how can we walk the accountability? Because that's a whole nother layer. But we have a choice of how we respond to things. And once you bring it, as we were saying, when you bring the awareness to folks, now they have the response ability, right? They have the ability to respond. They choose to do with that information once we share with it is important.
Things as we continue. So thanks and welcome, Angie.
All right.